Kate,
Yes,
how are you
sir.
doing, my sister?
I am well, and yourself?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for coming through.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Kate, where are you from?
I am from a village called Palape.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, your surname is Tshitswana.
Yes.
It sounds more from Borolo, where I'm from.
I don't.
Do you get that a lot?
I don't actually.
Yeah.
Usually, when I just say my surname, it's always, "What an awkward surname," or "Oh, Tipenyani," and I'm like, yes.
How long did it take you to know how to write it when you were starting?
Oh, I
primary
figured it
school?
out
Yeah.
finally. I think when I was in standard 6.
Ah,
So I'd always say Setswana.
okay.
So I would be like, they'll be like, what's your surname? I'm like, Setswana. So at prize giving, can you imagine how awkward it was?
Yeah.
And most of my teachers in primary were white.
Okay.
So that just worsened the situation.
Yeah.
They'll be like,
So they'll be saying also. So there was a time I used to go by my middle name. My middle name is Robert.
yes.
And there's a certain lady I worked with, Antoinette. This was in Joburg.
Yes.
And she said to me, why do you go by Robert? Why don't you use your name, Kamohelo? You
Yes.
know. Then I said, you know what? I'm doing this so that people can call me properly.
Yes.
And then I realized that, you know what? Why wouldn't it be better for me to actually use the name that I love? I go by Kamo at work. I go by
Yes.
Kamo. My kids call me Kamohelo sometimes. Baby. So I got to learn, you know what? People will learn your name. And
That is true.
It'll be fine.
That's so true. I think I remember I once had a client. I think she mispronounced my name, and so she later corrected herself. And she's like, "You should have corrected me." And I'm like, "I'm so used to people saying it wrong. It doesn't bother me anymore." She's
Yeah.
like, "No, you need to correct us because we need
Yeah.
to say your name correctly. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's your identity." And I was like, "Huh." So
Cool.
from then onwards, I think that's when it started.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Palape?
I did.
Okay.
So I did my preschool all the way up to Form 1 school. And
Okay.
that was irritating. I remember arguing with my mom because I went to Kase, right? And we would fight. I was like, Mama, imagine in my CV, because I think there was a point when you learn how to do CVs in primary,
Yeah.
you know. And I was like, imagine in my CV, I'm going to write preschool, high school, Kase, that's it.
You wanted to change.
I wanted to change.
So where did you go for from there?
From there, I went to Maung,
Oh, okay.
a school called Okavango International School. It was a mission school. It was a Christian school, amazing school. So I went there,
Yeah.
and then after that, went to UB, studied law.
Should I presume you're Christian?
I am.
Okay.
Shit.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a Christian are you?
Are there levels?
I don't know.
I don't think there's levels.
Well, okay. Maybe I should talk in the sense of practice.
Oh yes.
Yeah. How much in that scale? How much are you practicing?
Am I a
Sorry if I'm
practicing Christian?
yeah.
No, I get it because my mom is always like, I can't know I get a cake. Right? And I'm like, I'll go. So I
Yeah.
think I'm like a 5. And the 5 being I don't go to church every Sunday. I'll probably go like once every quarter,
Yeah.
you know.
Cool. Is it something that you decided, or is just, do you have questions about our faith that made you change the way
Yes.
things are looked at traditionally?
To be fair, I don't think I have questions about faith per se, because I will pray every night, I'll
Yeah.
read my Bible,
Yeah.
I'll have my devotion on my own.
Yeah.
But I think it's more of church, trying to find a church that I think I fit in. I was raised in an apostolic church, but that's when I think, as I grew older, and especially once I started schooling in Maung and attending a Pentecostal church, you then start questioning certain practices.
Yeah.
You come back home and then you're expected to continue where you left off, and you're like, ish, but why does this happen this way? Why does this happen that way?
Yeah.
So I think I'm just trying to find a church that I can fully fit in, but obviously I know that's not possible. I can't fully fit in.
Trust me, that's not easy. I've been there before.
So I'm just in that jumbo, you know.
Cool. Kate, thank you so much for coming through.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for coming through. So your day job, you're an attorney.
I am.
What does that mean?
An attorney means that I am a lawyer, duly admitted to practice in the court of Botswana, so that being the High Court of Botswana, the lower courts being your magistrate courts, and obviously the Supreme Court being your court of appeal. So that's just what it means. I offer legal advice, counsel, if you may, to individuals as well as entities.
Cool.
Yes.
I want you to take me, on a journey. If I was a butterfly in your office, what would I see? How's your day like? How does your day usually look like?
Disclaimer, I don't think my day looks like the generic lawyer, because I obviously have the privilege of working from home for most parts of the week.
I didn't know lawyers work from home.
Guys, it happens. You just need a cool boss.
Okay.
But it happens, and I think that's just because I'm nocturnal. But a typical day is so let's I'm going to give you two different scenarios. Where I'm in the office and I have a meeting or something urgent to attend to. I'll probably be in the office at around 6 or 7 in the morning, and that's just to beat the traffic. That's just to beat the A1 traffic. I'm blasting music. I'm blasting music, and my desk is a mess. Yes, my desk is a mess.
That's your personality?
Yes.
Okay.
I work in a disorganized functional mess, right? I'm thinking about one thing, probably in all of that jumbo also calling my boss to ask for advice. I prefer working alone. That's how I'm able to gather my thoughts much better. You'll probably also see when I have meetings, that's when I'll clean up and then prepare, sit down. And that's also when you'll see me in full-on formal, is when I have meetings or court. Otherwise, I'm probably in like a formal shirt or something and jeans, sneakers. That's about it.
Yeah.
And then out of the office by 11ish to grab lunch. And then home.
That's it.
And then I start working again at like 5 p.m. all the way to the early hours of the morning. And then,
how does a court day look like? Is it different?
It is.
How does it look?
A court day starts the previous day for me. If, let's say, I have to argue a matter, or I know I'm going to get grilled, it will probably start at around 4 p.m. Me going through the file, reading it, preparing, trying to think of the possible questions either the magistrate or judge will ask me. So magistrate is for the magistrate's court, judge either industrial court or high court, right?
Yeah.
And then reading the rules, reading the law, trying to figure out the possible questions, the possible outcomes and answers, and also just prepping client, especially if they're going to appear, and then the nerves will kick in. Court makes me extremely anxious.
I would imagine.
It is not my favorite thing to do. I don't like attending court, so I will always settle out of court if I can. But obviously,
which is good actually. Yeah, no, because at the end of the day, we want to have an agreement and move on.
Yes, I do not like litigating. I'm a huge believer in alternative dispute, resolutions and mechanisms. I don't see the point of litigation.
Is it generally how most attorneys prefer? Is that what they prefer, like to settle out of court?
No.
There's some people who like to
yes.
fight.
Remember, when you go to court, you're billing. And most will bill per hour. And the per hour is dependent on their years of experience. So they don't have an issue, or most will not have an issue with going to court. But I just prefer to do it differently. I think also it might stem from the fact that I don't like litigating, where I will try to, mitigate the risk and settle out of court. But obviously, in instances where I think it is in my client's best interest to litigate, I will do so, and I will do my best and put my best foot forward.
Interesting. I wouldn't like. I think there's quite a lot of pressure.
Yes.
I wonder, what are you always torn in between? Like, I have to make my client happy, let alone your boss. Your boss needs to be proud of you, and your colleagues. What is the pressure usually about? Is it about winning the case? Is it about, the people that you are dealing with, the judge or the magistrate that you're dealing with, or you are dealing with at the time? What is the pressure really?
The biggest pressure for me is the outcome favorable for my client. I think I have like a very, very, very calm employer. So typical example, I had court on Friday, and I was appearing before the Court of Appeal. This was my first appearance, and I was in trouble, our matter was most likely going to get dismissed, but because of administrative issues that were beyond our control. But obviously you have to write, you have to make an application and explain to the court that, look, this was at no fault of ours. We didn't comply because of administrative issues. But still, you're appearing in front of 10 justices and a double court. A double court means it's 2 courtrooms merged into one.
Okay.
So
when does that happen?
So the Court of Appeal has 4 sessions per year.
Okay.
The July session started on Friday.
Okay.
So we all had what's called roll call, basically to update the court on where we are with our matters, right?
Okay.
And I was listed for dismissal, and I had to make sure it doesn't get dismissed. Our appeal doesn't get dismissed. Now, there's like over 50 plus lawyers. The double court is full. There's 10 plus justices staring at you. And I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna get the lashing of my life. And so I'm texting, my boss. I'm like, I'm nervous. And he's like, don't worry.
Is he sitting in the room?
No, he's in Francistown.
Oh, okay.
So he says, just be calm. You're gonna be okay. And I remember he said to me, it is humanly impossible for anyone to shout at you. And in my head, I'm like, you're saying this because you're in Francistown?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I didn't get shouted at, which was shocking.
Okay.
I just explained, no, we filed this and this. And she was like, okay, no, we won't dismiss your matter. And I was like, we did it. And he's like, I told you, just be calm. Yeah. And I think that helps.
So does your boss tend to be like your mentor or sort of a mentor to you? Yes. How important is that?
It's extremely important because I'm just starting out in my career, right? And I always say to him, he's extremely intelligent. But like sometimes I'm like, are you concentrating? Because he does this thing where I'm thinking he's zoning out. We could be in the middle of an argument in court and he's playing with his pen. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, are you paying attention? And then he's like, yes, I am. He's just talking too long. And I'm like, oh, he's not listening. And then I try to take down notes. And then when it's our turn to speak and he speaks, I'm like, oh, he was actually paying attention. So I think it is really important because he teaches me the skills of litigation that I may lack, especially as somebody who's just starting out in the litigation space. But I think also just having the belief, also having a boss that you can just be honest about and say, look, I'm nervous. Help me through this. And they understand, they don't say, can you just go out there? They just say, no, you're gonna do great. I believe in you. I would not have made you go there if I didn't think you were going to struggle. So it's very important.
That's a beautiful relationship.
Yes.
So Kate, I want us to go back and for you to lay out how the system works, right?
Yes.
I know there's different areas when you talk about law. So I know there's criminal law, there's, did you say family law?
Yes.
What else? Corporate?
Yes, there's corporate, commercial law.
Yeah. Just lay the foundation for us briefly, and I want us to speak a little bit to each one of them.
Okay.
So how is the system laid out?
Yes. So generally speaking, right, the system is divided into two very broad areas, civil and criminal, right? With civil now being divided into other substreams. So that's where now you're gonna have your corporate, commercial, your mining laws, your aviation laws, your labor laws, your family laws. And it's done in this manner because, remember, unlike other countries or other jurisdictions, we don't have specialized courts in the strict sense.
Okay.
You would see, let's say in South Africa, they would have a constitutional court.
Okay. We don't.
And we don't.
Okay.
So with us, the High Court is regarded under the Constitution as the High Court that has unlimited jurisdiction to hear and try all matters. Whereas with the magistrate courts, there's certain limitations to it. If we're now dealing with issues that are monetary, it cannot exceed, the claim can't exceed 100,000.
Oh, for the magistrates?
Yes, for the magistrate courts. And then it's also divided into subs because you now have your chief magistrate and so on and so forth.
Then they will have different levels.
They would have different levels. Same thing applies for criminal matters. The magistrate courts cannot try criminal matters that have to speak to death. Because remember, death carries the potential of the death penalty. And that can only be awarded at the High Court.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it's mainly divided into those two, civil and criminal.
Okay.
Yes.
And you've sort of started explaining it. So the criminal, you've spoken a bit about the civil. What about the criminal side?
Yes. So criminal is, it's just criminal. Okay. It's your rape, it's your murder, it's your stock theft.
Okay.
It's your defilement, right?
Okay.
It's your white collar crime. We very rarely talk about that, but we are seeing it, especially I think corruption? In the it's corruption, it's fraud. Yes.
Okay.
We never want to term it as that, or we never put a name to it, but that's what it is. It's white collar crime.
Yeah. What is an equivalent of a jury? I know I watch movies a lot. What is an equivalent of a jury? Do we have that here?
We don't.
How does it work here? How is it different?
So our system, or our judicial system, does not provide for a jury. We just have, if it is either the magistrate, industrial, or high court, it's just a judge or the judicial officer, the presiding officer.
Yeah.
And with the Court of Appeal, you would have a panel of justices.
Okay.
Usually ranging from 3 to 5 justices hearing one matter at a go, right? My assumption is that the reason why we don't have a jury or a jury cannot work is our population. Okay. Remember, you ought not to know someone. Yes. You need to be unbiased. We're such a small country.
Okay.
I would probably, even if I may not know you personally, I would know someone that knows you. And
correct.
I don't think there's enough of us to continuously rotate all the matters in the
makes
judicial
sense.
system.
Makes sense.
Yes.
And do you happen to know what's in SA? They don't have
No,
jury as well.
they also don't have
It
juries.
makes sense.
Juries aren't prevalent, I think, in African countries.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, interesting. So let's delve into family law.
Yes.
I don't know if I like family law because I spoke to you when we were talking.
Yes.
I said I want us to speak a bit about family law. As you said, family law entails what are the areas that it entails?
Okay. So family law covers a wide spectrum. It speaks to matrimonial matters. So matrimonial matters is divorce. We just want to, make it sound a bit nicer. So it's divorce. It also speaks to custody. It speaks to maintenance. It speaks to visitation rights. It can also extend to speaking to how are we going to parent. So co-parental agreements, right? And then so I think it covers those ranges.
Okay.
Yes.
So does it cover issues of inheritance?
No.
Estate planning?
Yes.
Where does that one fall?
So issues of inheritance fall under what's called the law of succession.
Okay.
But we often term it as estate planning and management. So succession or inheritance comes after your demise or after somebody has passed away. But before that are different potential processes one can take, which is wills, creation of trusts. And that is meant to help people prepare, for their death. Because if you pass away without a will, you die what is known as intestate. And remember, this also is very, very vital for when we speak to marriages. We have what is called a dual legal system. So we have customary law, but we also have common law, right? Common law, if we want to delve into it, it's what is called the Roman Dutch law, inclusive of as well our statutes, our acts of parliament.
Okay.
So we have to balance those two. Yes.
Interesting. So now going back to what you explained as estate planning.
Yes.
And the fact that if you don't have a will, someone decides for you.
Yes.
Do you think it's important for people to rather have wills?
Absolutely.
Why? What have you seen?
Let's first get into what happens if you don't have a will or the importance of it, right? So if you have a will, there's a term that is often used to describe the importance of a will, and it's called ruling from the grave. With a will,
I have an idea what that means. Yeah.
You dictate to us, even from your grave, how you want your estate, estate being your properties, monetary, and so movables, your cars, if you have any shares, how you want that estate to be distributed. Do you want to include all of your children? Do you want to give all of your children?
Can you exclude some children?
Yes. Remember, there's a difference between inheritance, a right to inherit, and a right to maintenance.
Explain to us.
Children under the age of 18 years are entitled to maintenance by both biological parents, right? So even upon one's demise, if they have children, that person's estate has an obligation to create the means, where possible, to maintain the said children. That is a right that the children have and cannot be taken away.
18 years.
Until 18 years. Right? Because Under the Children's Act, you are regarded a child until you attain the age of 18 years.
Okay.
Slightly different where now parties are married, because under the Matrimonial Causes Act, where now you want to get a divorce, maintenance can extend to 21 years.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Yes.
I'm smiling because of that. Well, I didn't know.
Right.
Like someone at 21 can be maintained, but
Yes,
okay,
yes.
okay, yeah.
That's the threshold. And then you have a right to inherit. Where now there is a will, there is no right to inherit. You as we refer to people who draft wills. So if I were to draft a will, I would be termed the testatrix or the testator of the will. I decide who inherits, what they inherit, and how they inherit. Do I want to put clauses in that will that says, if I give you this farm, you are not entitled to sell this farm for X amount of years?
It's really ruling from the grave.
It is.
Yes.
It is. And the greatest examples that's always given is the Stellenbosch farms. The numerous Stellenbosch farms that now get dilapidated because they cannot be sold. The beneficiaries can't sell them because the will from the 1800s stated you cannot sell it, and you can't. So that is what it means to rule from the grave. And if I always say, you know, especially for those that wish to create generational wealth, wills are important because you set the tone. You don't give your children the chance to squander that which you have worked hard for. One of my most favorite things also about a will is, especially where you have minors, you get to decide in the event that you pass away and the other surviving parent cannot take care of the children or cannot take custody of those children for whatever reason, you get to say, okay, I would like for this person to be the custodian and guardian of my children. This is what they are limited to do.
Yeah.
You know, they cannot then squander the assets that are meant for my children.
Yeah.
I have created these avenues. I have this many properties. They can rent out 2 of them and ensure that my kids continue to go to a private school. It creates so much flexibility
And structure.
You know. You don't have that if you don't have a will.
So what happens if you don't have a will?
If you don't have a will, we now term it as you have died intestate. And the first thing that we need to determine is whether or not you are a tribesman. Remember when we started the conversation, we were discussing that we are a dual legal system.
Yeah.
So we have customary law and common law.
Yeah.
So where now we reach the determination that you're a tribesman, we now need to dissolve your estate under the rules or customs of, you know, your tribe. So now that is left to, you know, whatever tribe you come from to determine. And that's where it gets tricky.
Yes.
Because each tribe has its own rules and regulations.
Yes. And people have their interests.
Yes. So, and it's the biggest issues that most courts have now had to deal with, is one would say, no, but in terms of our customs, a female child cannot inherit, or primogeniture, where the custom is that I think the last born son inherits to the disadvantage of the female children, you know. So all those little issues.
So it really comes down to, if you have a will, like you say, you rule from the grave. Yes. If you don't have, someone else will decide what happens to your children.
Someone else will decide, yes.
And
your wife. Remember now, if you're married, your wife, if you have a partner and a determination can be made that there was a universal partnership, or you two have been living together as husband and wife, though you were not married. What then happens to that person?
Sorry. So if you're living with someone and you're not married,
Yes.
They get something?
It depends on whether or not universal partnership can be proved.
Okay.
And what they would get would be their interest or their share. They cannot get more than that. Unless, of course, a will was written. And then that would outline whether or not they're entitled to benefit.
What tends to be the trend, just generally speaking, in Botswana? Do people have wills or not?
They don't. Botswana don't have wills.
Why do you think is the reason why Botswana was not a will?
A lack of knowledge and understanding of what a will is.
Let's start here. Just the basics.
Yes.
How much does it cost to draft a will?
Right, so that. If you were to go to a lawyer, right, in a private law firm, 6,000. However, legal aid does that for free. We also have the University of Botswana Legal Clinic. They also help people that can't afford or don't have the means to do so. But when we're getting to that, when we're now speaking to affordability, if there is one thing I would love to see entities do or companies do for their employers, is when we speak about employee wellness. This is a huge part of wellness.
Precisely.
But it's often left behind.
We focus on the money,
yes,
making savings after retirement.
Working out, but we don't look at this huge aspect of things. Because what is the point of working so hard if you do not leave behind a solid structure for your loved ones?
It sounds so simple. I mean, I would rather pay, like you say, an average of 6,000 to make sure that, my kids and my family continue at least in the way that I would have if I was there, but it's something that, I don't know, someone has to preach it really, for people to actually draft wills and have wills.
I completely agree. I think as the legal fraternity as well, we have done a bit of a disservice as well to the public. I don't think we have had enough engagements to discuss and explain what it is. Because oftentimes when you speak about a will, to the ordinary Motswana, the misconception is, "Ki itholela leso," right? And I always say, but it is going to happen.
Yeah, either way.
It is an eventuality we must accept. But would you not rather have everything in order? Would you not rather ensure that your family mourns as opposed to now having to do urgent applications and fight? I remember we witnessed this a lot during the COVID era, where now families are fighting over where to bury someone. And you're now having to do urgent applications during a pandemic where you are required to bury someone, especially if they died over COVID over a short period of time.
Yeah.
It's tormenting. Because even with a will, you can state whom you vest your burial rights on. Right? You can state where it is you want to be buried. Let's just squash the commotion. Have a will. Tell us, where do you want to get buried? Do you even want to get buried or cremated? I remember growing up, once upon a time, I was relatively young.
Yeah.
My grandmother and I went to a funeral because I was raised by my grandparents. I always attended funerals, like from a very young age. It was a thing.
Yeah.
And for her, it was a thing of, no, attend so that by the time that I pass away, you don't fear it, you don't get shook. So we did that. And I remember we went, the night vigil happened. And in the morning, a car came to collect the corpse.
Yeah.
And we're all wondering, what's going on? No, there's a will. This person is not, the family was a ZCC family, so there was a Christian family, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, this person is of another religious belief and they are going to get buried in accordance to that religion. So we are taking them to the Muslim cemetery. And everyone was just shocked. No one knew of the... And also, these are conversations we also need to have with our parents. Look, I respect the fact that this is your religion, but this is what is going to happen when I pass away. Come to terms with it. I mean, I've written wills where people are very unequivocal about, you will not kill any animal and cook it and serve it. You will not do... Right?
At the funeral.
Yes. Or
and
during the
it's their
proceedings.
will.
It's their will and it's their wish.
Yeah.
If that is how they lived, why must it now stop just because they've passed away? Or I do not want X, Y, and Z to attend my funeral.
Who enforces that? I mean, things like that.
Yes. So you have what is known as an executor.
Okay.
So this very rarely happens, but it should. The minute someone passes away, what has to happen, whether or not they've died intestate, you have to go and do what is known as a death notice to the Master of the High Court. So within the High Court are different offices, and there's a certain office known as the Master of the High Court, who's in charge of issues relating to estates or people that have passed away, right? So you do the death notice, and they will quickly check whether or not there is a will. And they will immediately, especially where now there's burial rights, they will call in the executor, hand it over. Even if you were to also come to, because I always say to people when I draft their wills, inform someone that you have drafted a will. You do not say the contents, but say to someone, if something were to happen to me, go and ask for Kate, or immediately go to the Master of the High Court. Because even if Kate no longer exists, there are 2 copies registered with the Master of the High Court.
Okay.
Right. So the Master of the High Court, alongside the executor, will enforce it. Because it's legally binding.
It sounds to me like, you can write down what I would perceive as, the pettiest thing.
Yes.
And I can imagine the commotion, because I think a lot of people will find out those things during the, whatever, in this case, a funeral.
Yes.
That's really bad.
It's not bad, but think about it from this context. The commotion would not have started by virtue of death. This is how this person was even, before. So why should it change by virtue of death? You knew, we all knew that the deceased had that one child, that they were very clear that they did not want this child to inherit anything because they squander assets or whatever the reason. Why do we then get shocked when they fulfill their promise and their intention?
I've had cases where, I don't know how true is this, that, even if you had kids that you were, let me not use the word hiding, or,
illegitimate.
Illegitimate. I guess that's the legal word. The government can look for those kids. How true is that? They look for those kids and give them what's due to them.
It is false to a certain extent.
Okay.
There is a distinction between wills and pension funds and insurance policies.
Okay.
With insurance policies and pension funds, they have a discretionary or an obligation to look for what is termed as dependents. Remember, they do so by virtue of the fact that those children are your dependents.
Okay.
So even if I think I can't recall whether this was a Botswana or South African case,
Yeah.
but there was a case of married man passed away, but had been and was cheating on the spouse, on the wife, and had been making monthly transactions to his side. And
so like maintenance to the other family,
yes.
yeah.
Not even to the family, it's just to that one single woman who was having an extra marital affair.
Oh, they don't have a child?
No child.
Oh, okay.
And upon his demise, she then said, no, I'm a dependent. I have these transactions that prove on a monthly basis.
She's
he
saying
gave
that to
me
the wife,
yes.
to the widow.
Yes.
This lady also. How do you come in and say something like that? I'm a dependent.
So, right? So dependency isn't just children. Whom were you taking care of? So that's done by your pension funds and your insurance policies. And insurance policies also to a certain extent, right? Because with insurance policies, there is a beneficiary list that has to be adhered to. The most that insurance policies can go is where they now look for dependents being your children.
Okay.
Those illegitimate and legitimate, and that's just by virtue of they are entitled.
Yeah, I want to go back to an example that you gave.
Yes.
What you are saying is, I don't have a side.
Yes.
But I would imagine I have a side and no one knows them.
Yeah.
And they show up at after my funeral or after I'm gone, and they say to my wife, I don't want to, sponsor evil. I'll call it that. But would you say sometimes doing things that can be kept a record of is bad?
Yes.
Because I've heard that also in terms of, and we'll get into matrimonial issues. I've heard, this other lawyer, there's a certain lawyer that I like listening to, James Sexton, he's a divorce lawyer.
Yes.
He said, why should you send a message?
Yes.
Why should you send pictures? Why
Yes.
don't you just call?
Yes.
Because all of that can be tracked.
No, that's so
and be
true.
found
Look,
out.
even and I it's not wrong because it's my job. It's
You
my
will
my
dig
my,
for that
my, my job
information.
is to also my job is to protect my client.
Of course.
I always say, especially where I know my client is having an extramarital affair. The minute they come and sit on my chair, and we consult, I ask, have you been making transactions? What have you been referencing them as? Because I don't want to find myself now, having an application where your mistress is becoming a second defendant and she's now being sued. You either stop it or you stop making transactions. Go and cash out that money and give her cash. Because a paper trail will always exist. Money, if it's cashless, if it's cash, we can always find a way to explain. So I agree with him. Don't leave proof of your ill behavior.
We'll get to that one, but I wanted to, before we leave this one here, the
Yes.
wills, there are cases where I've had, children suffer after the parents leave.
Yes.
Because the person that they've been trusted to take care of is not really giving them the resources that they deserve. Is there cases like that? Is it true? And why is it that things like that can, happen?
Yeah, it is true. It does exist. Remember, we are human. And humans are bound to want more than that which they have been given, right? So it also happens, I think, based off of the structure of the will. I always say, make sure that your executor and the legal guardian are not the same people.
Okay.
Because remember, an executor ensures that the will is being enforced in accordance to all the clauses. So if you have an executor also acting as the legal guardian of your children, there are no checks and balances. But also, let me not take away the responsibility from the Master of the High Court. The High Court is regarded as the upper guardian of minor children. So that means that even though you may have children, or I may have children, there is somebody who has rights over them more than I do, and that's the High Court. Because they're the upper guardian. They ensure that I do not use, I do not misuse, the rights that I have onto the kids. So I think the Master of the High Court, especially where we'll speak to minor children, should have a way in which they do checks and balances. I don't know why that doesn't exist, or not even doesn't exist, why it or if it does, it's not implemented. I think it's a loophole within our judicial system, and it's unfair. But it is also caused by family members that, after parents pass away, neglect the children. Because surely somebody ought to know that something is going on. And they don't go and report it. I always say, because the Master of the High Court could simply do this by onboarding social workers to ensure that at least 4 times in a year they go and check on these kids. So it's a disservice. But I mean, remember, this also speaks to a recent case that we saw where an executor was a lawyer and a former minister, and she squandered the assets that belonged to the beneficiaries.
Greed.
Yeah.
At its best, yeah.
And despite the Court of Appeal saying, I think it was over 4 million worth of an estate, and could not account to what they did with it. So I think it's a shame. And it also forms part of white collar crime. And unfortunately, as we have seen in this country, the consequences are a slap to the wrist. They
So
are
people will
never
keep on
grave.
doing
Yeah,
that.
there's very little grave consequences.
Yeah. So, some of these things, was it, I know with the previous government, they were trying to change the constitution.
Yes.
Were these some of the things that they wanted to change, or it was something else?
Something else. I did not see any of this.
Interesting. So in terms of, older people die and their children are in their 40s,
Yes.
their 50s.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of fights.
Yes.
Where a parent has died and they told this child, no, this car is yours, no, this land is yours.
Yes.
And there was never anything written down. How do you deal with things like that?
You can't. It's difficult to, especially where it was just said. It's one thing, and I recently saw a recent judgment where at the very least a letter was written and at least signed, though not registered. Can we then say, but these were their wishes, this was an intended will? Then can we try and navigate the parameters of the law to enforce it? But when now it's word of mouth, it becomes difficult, because now there's conversations of duress. Are you lying? And I think that's why it's really important to educate the elderly. I mean, I argue with my grandmother every week, and I'm like, can you please just go and do it? I'll pay for it. She'll be like, no, wait. And I'm like,
it's that thing that
yes,
is like, I'm bringing death upon
yes,
me. I don't want to touch
right,
things like that. But it's real, I guess. It's real.
It is.
Wow. So when you talk of matrimony,
yes,
something similar, is divorce and, splitting things up.
yes.
A question to you, do we have prenups here?
We have what is known as anti-nuptial contracts, right? So they would act as a form of prenup, maybe to start. What currently happens now in Botswana is once you get married, the general assumption is you are married out of community of property.
Okay.
Until you decide to sign what is known as a Form B, which now
Okay.
says, no, I want to get married in community of property, profit and loss, right? So anti-nuptial contracts usually come in where you want to get married in community of property, but want to safeguard assets that you had prior to getting married. So now that would speak to how that works. What are the properties that you got into in their marriage? Would they form part of your estate or not? Under what conditions? So on and so forth.
Okay, it makes sense.
Yes.
As a lawyer, would you, which regime would you recommend? This is purely your opinion.
Purely my opinion.
And I'm sure there's reasons why you're saying that.
And I always get a lot of heat for this opinion.
Yeah.
I would always recommend out of community of property. If I were a legislator, I would do away with marriages in community of property. But I obviously understand the attachment to in community of property, particularly for religious or personal beliefs, where people tend to feel like if we're getting married out, we are saying we don't trust each other or we already foresee a divorce happening, So I can understand those discomforts. But what we also tend to forget is that marriage is a contract that you enter into, and as such has contractual consequences. Yes, look, marital regimes are dependent on people's lifestyles and people's risk appetites. I always say to people, when we think or when we talk about getting married out of community or property, the people's first assumption is, but we're not going to get married. We love each other. Well and good. And that's not the reason why it exists. The primary goal of getting married out of community or property is to preserve assets or estate. Think about it from a financial perspective or a risk perspective. What happens if one spouse goes into business? The business fails. Would you rather lose all your assets? Or, because remember, the minute you're married in community or property, you're one.
So legally you are one.
You're one, yes.
Not just religiously.
Yes, legally you're one. Because a house, you may have taken out the mortgage, but remember there is a consent form that says you are married in community or property and you consent to the loan being taken out and you don't mind if it gets taken away if failure to pay. But if you're married out of community or property, nothing of mine is going to get foreclosed because of your liabilities. At least we are then able to preserve this 50%, which being is my 100% of assets, So I don't think we ever look at it from that context. Sometimes I give people an example of, we are now seeing the rise of betting in Botswana. We take this for granted, but gambling is an addiction, and one that ruins families, that ruins lives. Where you are now married in community or property, you risk the life of somebody suffering from an addiction, not just betting, any addiction, and having the ability to sell and squander all your assets.
Ooh.
Yes, people can say to me, no, but if we're married in community or property, I need to sign a consent form. Those get forged all the time. I have I have attended cases where someone would have signed to a loan worth 100,000. When the person gets to the bank, they change that one to a 7.
Hey,
When you get divorced, the judge doesn't care what your story is. You must find a way to pay that 700,000. At that time, she probably is not gainfully employed anymore. You are the one that's gainfully employed. You remember, the Form B says marriage in community of property, comma, profit and loss. This is your loss, take it. We now have to say to you, okay, which property are we selling to offset all your liabilities? And it happens so many times. I have seen so many people who have lost millions because someone lied and, said they have this qualification whilst they didn't, and you marry this person.
That's so sad, man.
Right? So it just safeguards yourself.
But can you change the regime?
You can.
If you are married in community of property,
Yes.
or vice versa, what does it take to change from one regime to the other?
An application and consent of
With
the other.
yes.
So you just make an application to the court to say we would like to change our marital regime for these reasons. You then just also cause advertisements to be done on the government gazette and one other local newspaper. I think it's 3 consecutive weeks. Then you're good to go.
So it's similar. It's like getting married again.
Yes, and then now where you're married in community or property and you want to change it to out, there now has to be a discussion on the distribution of assets. Who retains which assets? And that's usually where the problem is.
And would you agree with me that that part should be done while things are okay?
Yes, but I've never seen it work out for the better. To be fair, every time, or in most instances that I've seen people change their marital regime, it's either to ensure that they don't get divorced, or they will change it and a few months later file for divorce. And it's always people changing from in to out.
Okay. Why is that? Why do they is it because there was already existing issues that they were trying to, avoid, but this thing was always coming?
Yes. It's always under the guise of, let's just deal with, because remember, when you now bring divorce into the picture, it will always turn sour. Or more often than not, it will turn sour. So some people will try to eliminate this hard part, so that when now divorce comes in, if there's minor children, at least the only thing that we'll fight about is custody and maintenance. But our assets that we've secured, at least one party feels like, no, I secured that which I wanted to secure. She can't take away what I worked hard for, is what is usually the assumption,
Tell me something. If you are married in community of property,
yes,
and there is no, what do you call the prenups again?
Antinuptial contract.
Antinuptial
Yes.
contract. You didn't have that at the beginning. Is there something that can be drafted to say, hey, we forgot?
No.
So it's either you would have to change the regime
Yes,
altogether.
yes.
You can't say, no, we forgot.
No. Unfortunately, we don't have that provision within our laws. It has to be done prior to getting married.
As we're having this discussion, it becomes more and more apparent to me that marriage, holy matrimony,
Yes,
is more of a contract.
it is.
I know we know it's a contract.
We
know we
downplay
sign.
it.
We know it's. But at the end of the day, it's a contract.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't like to look at it that way,
Yes.
especially for religious reasons.
Completely
And, you know,
true.
it doesn't matter whether it was the bishop who signed or it
Yes.
was the, you know. So we really downplay that part. And I wonder why. Because at the end of the day, it is a contract. And to me, sounds like a monetary contract.
It is. It's a financial contract.
It's a financial contract.
Yeah, for the better part of it, it's a financial contract. And you know, I always say, I wish it was as difficult to get married as it is to get divorced. And then
Makes sense.
maybe we could have
I
an
agree.
understanding of how serious this thing that we are trying to enter into is.
I think a lot of people are sold love. I had a conversation with my love, and I asked her, "Do you think marriage has anything to do with love?" And you know, we spoke lightly about it, but if you really look at it, these are two separate things. They
Yes.
tend to be around, you know, the same path,
Yes.
especially at the beginning. But as things change, now you start realizing, like you are saying, it becomes, this thing is financial contract, and
It is.
it's controlled by the government or the law.
Yes.
You have whatever you've signed is.
Also, think about it. You get to see how much of a financial contract is when you want to try and get a loan from the bank. This is meant to preserve financial institutions so that they don't have any issues or qualms with, now we want to recover our money, and then this spouse is saying, no, I knew nothing about the loan. It's the whole purpose. It's to preserve or cover people for financial reasons. I don't know. My view of it, I once said to a friend of mine, when he told me he was getting married, and I asked, but I knew he was going to get married in because, you know, he's Christian. So I jokingly asked, so are you going to get married in or out? And he says, obviously in. And I laugh. I'm like, so have you gone for marriage counseling? She's like, of course, we've been going for months now. I was like, have you ever gone to see a lawyer?
No.
No.
Yeah.
I'm like, you see, this is the problem. We encourage marriage counseling, especially with religious leaders. And we also encourage, go for medical exams, go test for this and that. But very rarely do we ever say to people, sit down with a financial advisor, sit down with a lawyer. Because that is what marriage also is. It's finances. It's law.
Majorly.
It's law. Sit down and let's help you understand. People always ask, for a country that has such a huge divorce rate, with the
Huge
primary
divorce rate.
Yeah, with the primary reason being finances. Why are we not spreading awareness? Look, I've never been married, so I don't even know what happens at the district commissioner's office. But sometimes I wonder, what is actually being said? Are people made to understand the consequences of not just entering into a marriage, but most importantly, the marital regime? Because that plays a huge role, especially where there's an imbalance of power, if I may say, where one is a working individual and the other one is a stay-at-home, either husband or wife. That's an imbalance of power. And if you get married, even if you get married out of community or property, what then happens should a divorce occur to the stay-at-home husband or wife? Alimony now. We now get into conversations of alimony. How long have you been a stay-at-home husband or wife? Can you get a job? You probably can't. Are you entitled to alimony or not? What is the criteria? I wish we could do more. I wish
agree.
we could have stringent laws so that people know what they're getting into. Another thing is also, remember, we're speaking to this aspect of marriage and divorce for purposes of common law or civil marriages. But there's also customary marriages governed in their own way. Where with customary marriages, that's where now you also have the right to enter into a polygamous marriage if you so wish. But that's also not regulated, and rightfully so, because it's customary law. But it begs the question, what happens when one of the wives want to leave? How do we distribute assets?
But is it recognized legally?
Yes.
The customary.
Yes. So customary marriages are recognized. However, if you want to enter into a polygamous marriage, you have to stick solely to customary marriages. That means you get married under your customary laws at the kota. You cannot then sign at the district commissioner. So you can't sign a marriage certificate and choose a marital regime, because now that's when it transcends into the realm of bigamy, because now you have two wives, but the other one is married under common law, whilst one is...
Well, wait. I thought you could you could marry one wife according to common law, and so if you had to marry, if I was to marry two wives, it should be both under customary.
Yes. So if you're to take on another wife, and this is why I think with our, I tend to forget his name, but with the polygamist, I'm not sure if it's Sekati or, what he then had to do. Remember, he spoke about it, and he says the first wife was so understanding where he had to then divorce her because they were married under common law. So they had to get a divorce.
So you have to get a divorce and then
move to customary marriages.
Tell me something. If you probably touched on this a bit. If you've stayed with someone for a certain time and you're not married, in some cases where you have kids, but there's no signed, papers, there's no contract. What happens if those people split? Can the law say something, do something?
Yes. The law then speaks to what is known as a universal partnership.
Okay.
Right. And in that instance, we are saying, though we were not married, either under customary or common civil law, we lived our lives like husband and wife. And there was an economic relationship between the two of us.
Again, economic.
Yes. Wherein I invested either time, money, skill, labor into this relationship. And by such virtue, I am entitled to a certain portion of this person's assets.
Does it tend to be 50-50?
No.
Okay.
Not necessarily 50-50.
Yeah.
We then look at what your contribution was.
So, how do you quantify that? If I was a house husband.
Yes.
House boyfriend.
Yes.
Right? And my wife is working.
Yes.
How do I quantify the amount that I need to get if we were to separate?
Yes. We would then look at the duties that you did. How much does a domestic worker earn? How long have you been doing it for? There's now gratuity that we now can speak to, right? And remember, you working within the household, it gave them the opportunity to go out there and work and further whatever it is that they wanted to do. Yes, which means that the money that could have went towards paying for a domestic worker or a helper went towards what? Investing. Did you contribute to purchasing of a house? If so, how much? We now need to look at what now, how much can we now quantify it to? Yes.
there's a loophole I had, you know, where people write the assets they have, they use other relatives'
Yes.
names, and I'm ruffling feathers here. I don't know anyone, but I've heard that it happens.
It does,
where,
it does.
Where, you know, people use the relatives, the side chicks, the side
Yes.
guys, they use their names to say they own
Yes.
properties that they actually own. How does the law help in a case where, can you really say, you know, this person owns something but they wrote the other person? Can you, how does it work in cases like that if people were to separate? And do you think, this person has something, I think this thing belongs to them, but they didn't write in with their name?
It's difficult to prove, especially with immovable properties. Because remember, the assumption under the Deeds Registry Act is whoever's name, title is written in, holds title over the property.
Yeah.
Right. The trick is we go back to the paper trail. We now have your Finance Intelligence Act, your Financial Intelligence Act. We now have your anti-money laundering laws, right? You cannot cash out a huge sum of money. So you're going to surely find a transaction for payment made to purchase that property, or financing of some sort having been entered to, or this person having signed as surety. So something you'll be able to find. Just go through the financial records. Sit down, ask for financial records that date back to 6+ years, and look at the paper trail. What you now do is you say, where you are married, or even where there's a universal partnership, you're then able to say, for this amount of time, this person took out, peace sake, 1 million as a loan. But I see this 1 million leaving the account and going into Kate's trust account, Kate's law firm's trust account. Where did that money go to? This money belonged to, if you are married, or let's say married in community of property. This money belonged to the joint estate. Where did this money go to? I, by law, have a share or an interest of 500,000. I want my money back. So you can't, it would be difficult to sue for the property back, but for the money used, if you were to find a paper trail, you could then ask for your share back, your 50% share back. It's just about finding the paper trail.
Again, don't leave paper trail. But it's very difficult. I mean, in the
Yes.
in the
But
world
it
that we're
happens.
in.
Oh no, it happens, especially where you are buying properties in the villages that don't cost a lot of money. It happens. Or where it is inheritance. You have people that say, no, I'll come get it. I don't understand my
This
wife.
person, yeah.
No, it happens, and we've dealt with them, and what can we do?
Yeah, earlier on you spoke about, you know, a huge number of divorces that we've been seeing in recent years, and one of the reasons you mentioned is finances.
Yes.
Just before we close, what are the big things there in finances? What is happening?
The biggest one is, I think there's about 3, right? The first one is a misuse of funds.
One partner.
Yeah, one partner, or the other feeling like the one is misusing funds.
Okay.
And this normally happens when we just love taking loans. You can sit down with a household whose income per month is 20,000 or 15, and they have loans to the tune of upwards $1 million, but have no assets to show for it. That is going to be a big dent to the household financially. Remember, where there is no financial security within a household, there's bound to be friction. Because as a female, we culturally, we have created a position that says, the minute you take my child from my household, my child cannot then come back to me and say, kana ga ke na madi a borotho. So it creates that burden, especially on men.
Yeah.
So it's the misuse of funds, or it's where now one partner is left to care financially for the household, whilst the other does as they please with their finances. That never works in the long run. You're gonna feel the dent, especially where you are low to middle income earners, right?
You feel the dent because there's
You
always
do.
a gap.
Yes.
Yeah.
The third, in terms of finances, is where family. Always giving family money without consulting your spouse.
So you're saying if I want to give my father money for petrol, my wife should know?
I would say.
I'm giving like
Yes.
the most simplistic example.
Yes, but I would say the best thing to do is, in terms of saving one's marriage, you are better off having your family ask your spouse for things, and her family ask you.
Yeah.
It makes things easier. Because then it would be, okay, let me ask Raholabi about this. Then if the decision is no, you would then be able to say, hi mama, no, unfortunately we can't. But remember, if now they come to you and you say, okay, no, and you come back being the bearer of bad news, it is not you are refusing. It is your wife is refusing.
Yes.
So that's just what I always advise.
Yeah, I've heard of that, and I think it works really well because you're protecting each other.
Yes.
And everything that you do, you actually agree, so that the people don't feel like there's a. Because even kids do that, you know. If
I
if
do
my
it to
son,
my parents all the time.
Yeah, if my son asks me to use my phone and I say no, they're going to check mommy. If he says yes, they'll always go to it's always like that. Have we heard of hypergamy?
Yes.
How prevalent is it in Botswana? Do women really date up?
Not that I know of. Hey? I'm yet to hear.
Yeah.
And it would be very, very fascinating.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard of it. But also, it could happen, but at most, it being relationships, because customarily, it wouldn't be recognized because only polygamy is recognized.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Kate, there's a lot that I want us to discuss.
Yes.
And I'm having, thoughts about, a lot of things that I would like to discuss, again, for the benefit of people who watch this podcast. When you talk of divorce, what are some of the craziest things you've seen? The reason I'm asking that is not a lot of people think that it will come to them.
Yes.
And then sometimes when it shows up, I had a saying that, whenever you find yourself in a divorce lawyer's office, it's already too late.
Yeah.
Like you said, I should have talked to you before.
Yes.
I should have talked to you before. So what are some of the things that, you can warn people about, that how things can turn around?
It is the minute I always say to people, whether or not you are the one filing for divorce or you are the one receiving the divorce papers, there's always this assumption of, I know my spouse. The minute those divorce papers, that summons, enters the hands of whomever we are serving with a divorce, all bets are off. And that's the saddest thing.
No one can ever like that.
I remember I once had a conversation, with someone, and I tried to tell them, because you can always foresee. I think because remember, I've been doing this since I was in third year. I'm all graduated now.
Yeah.
And you can always foresee, oh, this one is going to be messy. But we have, from 2 different urgent applications, to fraudulently accusing somebody of harming you even where
So
harm
people
does
hit
not
themselves.
exist. Yeah,
Hit yourself so that it looks real.
Right, and remember, we now live in a world where domestic violence is so prevalent.
Very prevalent,
And we are now trying to reach a point where we try to take it seriously.
Mm.
So the slightest cry of abuse will be taken seriously. You know, to instances where you have in-laws going to people's bosses and saying, you know, why are you hiring this person that's abusive? To dirty laundry being aired out. You know, accusations of partners making their spouses sick whilst they're pregnant in an attempt to deprive them of access to their kids. You know, to state how unfit of a parent they are. We have seen parents ask for an absurd amount of maintenance just to fix the other party.
Is there a formula of how much maintenance you can give? Is there a formula?
We've tried to create one. I recently saw a formula in the UK courts, right?
Yeah.
Where they then say, they try to calculate how many, so it would be the spouses, so it's two individuals, we calculate the income, and then also calculate the children. And so the gross income would be, the children would be entitled to at most 25% of their parents' income, right? But in terms of Botswana law, the general consensus is it's in accordance to one's means. So what we would do is we would sit down and try to figure out or give a breakdown of how much the children need per month. And then look at how much the two parents earn per month, what their general expenses are, and we look at how much is left, and then we try to see, okay, but you are able to afford to carry 60% of the load, whilst you can only afford to carry 40% and still live a comfortable lifestyle. So it's difficult. I think the inability to have a strictly structured formula is also what leads to so much fighting.
Of course.
Because I've said this before and I felt bad, and I was like, you cannot punish one parent for earning more than the other. It's not their fault. You know, I say that and it comes off as insensitive. But just because one parent earns more does not mean that they now have to carry a disproportionate load where now the other parent, because they earn less, and it often happens, especially if, and I hate to say this, especially if it's women, if women earn less, the assumption often is, I then don't have to be involved in the maintenance of the child. But you do.
Because she is.
Yes,
in normal
you are the parent,
circumstances,
yes.
when everything is going well,
Yeah. So I really hope we can get to a point where we create a structure for calculating maintenance, but not only that, where we also have a family court, a specialized family court that strictly deals with these issues, so that hopefully one day we speed up the process, because divorces can drag on for 5 good years, if not more. And then what happens to the parties in that process?
What's the biggest, should I say biggest? You know, you spoke about the duration.
Yes.
But what was the biggest payout you've had that has been paid during a divorce that you've had or you've worked with?
In terms of maintenance?
Yeah.
20,000 per month per child. And they were 2 children, inclusive of holidays, I think around 2 holidays outside the country per year. School fees at a very expensive school, paid for by the one parent. Shopping allowances, yes.
And who eats that money?
We do not know.
And you can't monitor.
You can't.
So because most of the time, especially kids under 18.
Yes.
Most of the time they're taken care or by the the custody is taken by the wife or the woman, right?
Yes.
It's the case. Have you seen cases where the man is the one taking the custody?
Yes, I have. Sometimes actually, and this one always shocks me. Where a woman leaves, and rightfully so, if you want to walk out, right? Leaves the father with the child. We institute divorce proceedings, and because he's known I'm the primary caretaker, he says, no, I want custody. We'll split the school fees. Everything else will be on me. And she then says, no, I want custody of the kids and I want maintenance. He says, I don't want to drag this out. Cool, that's fine. A month, not even a month after we finalize the divorce, the child is back to living with the father. Well, the children are back to living with the father, and he's okay with it, right? And then I get a call from her lawyer one day. Your client isn't paying maintenance. Please remind her what it means, to not comply with the court order. I call mine and he's like, dude, I've been living with these kids. What is she talking about? And I'm like...
Because it was clear. It was
yes.
clear. She was just looking for money.
Right? So sometimes we all just want a payout. And this is why it's really important to sit and discuss certain things and to consider. I always say, more often than not, we do not go into marriages to get a divorce. I don't believe that the general population that gets divorced went into it thinking they would get divorced. But it is naive to assume that it cannot happen to you.
Yeah.
And you need to ask yourself, should it happen to me? What are the mechanisms that I've put in place, not only for myself, but for my children? Because you cannot assume that this person is going to play fair. There is no fair in divorce. Very rarely do you have two people come and sit down. Yeah, no, there isn't. Because there is always going to be a loser. There is always going to be someone who has to give more.
Have you seen peaceful divorce?
I have. I was so impressed.
How did that look like?
It looked like two people who have a general consensus of, we love each other, but this marriage is not working. And it's
what does
okay.
That mean? What did that mean? We love each other, but this marriage is not working.
Remember, marriage is not love. It's not entirely love.
Yeah.
It's obligations. Marriage is predominantly obligations. And sometimes you just don't want the obligation that comes with a marriage. Or you cannot handle it. Or I love you, but we cannot live together as a married couple because our goals differ. And we are going to be at loggerheads in this household if we do not move apart. And so they just sit down and say, no, okay, what do you want? I want this and this. And they'll come to us and they'll say, no, I agree with my wife. We agreed to take this and that. And you just draft everything all at once and you finalize the divorce.
Wow.
Right?
What was the cheapest divorce you dealt with? Or cheapest in terms of, legal fees?
Legal fees?
Yeah.
15,000.
So it was something similar to that.
Yes.
You know what? This is how I feel. We want this thing to end.
Yes.
Wow, that's beautiful. Oh, yeah, I think it's interesting to see relationships ending like that because there isn't a lot of wounds.
Yes.
And you've sort of thought about this thing and say, is it gonna work? Is it not gonna work? And let's come together. And people like that remain friends.
I agree, and I always say people like that, they have the highest probabilities of getting back together. As opposed to, I remember I had a client and I'd always ask, are you sure you don't want? Because you could see he truly loved his wife. Because even when we're discussing strategy and I'm saying to him, you need to stop it. Look, stop being nice. Can we be,
In the middle of divorce?
Yeah.
Ah.
And he'd be like, you know what, I love my wife and I really feel sorry for her. I feel like her lawyers are doing an injustice to her. Still that compassion of a husband. And And I'd always ask because, okay, yes, it's a job and my job is to get them divorced, but I also need to be counsel. I also need to be fair. And I'll always ask, are you sure? Should I not find you guys a therapist? Are you sure it's over? And I think that's the one that broke my heart, where he said, in as much as I love her, I fear her because the accusations that she's laced against me could have destroyed me and our children's futures. So if I take her back, what more is she going to do to me? And I think that's when I realized you cannot claim to know someone, especially when something like divorce hits, because you may know them, but you probably have not gone through knowing them when they may feel like they have been truly hurt or truly hard done, which is maybe how they felt at the time.
Or you didn't see them when things were hard.
Yes.
You don't know how they would react in situations like that. The divorces that you're seeing, is it mostly young people or older people, or there's no?
Mostly young. And mostly young, I mean...
5 years? Marriage?
Yeah. 0 to 5 years. Or 0 to maybe, let's say 0 to 10. But there's also been those, where people have been married for 30 years. And you ask, and I hate to say this because I'd often, and I blurt it out by mistake.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, but you guys are awaiting your death. Why don't you just hold on? Because,
Yeah.
it's, you're in your 80s.
Yeah.
Why are you
just
getting
hold on.
divorced?
Yeah.
And
the guy goes marry a 30-year-old.
It's the craziest thing.
Yeah.
And you get told, and it's often abuse. In those instances, it's where there is a fear for life. And you ask, but how long have you been unhappy in this marriage? And they say, the first day or the first year. And you ask yourself,
20 years of marriage.
why did you
years.
hold on?
Yeah.
Because by the time they come, there has been so much resentment that has been built, and hatred. And I always say, yes, sometimes we may not notice these signs, but in most instances, they would have occurred even during the courting stages. The little signs existed. Yes.
A few things. Wow.
So it's really sad. When I witness, those I think are the ones that hurt the most. They're older than me by relatively old enough to be my grandparents and that. And you wonder, but why? So yeah, I think the biggest one is finances and then physical abuse.
Interesting. Last question.
Yes,
I promise.
it's okay.
I think we should have,
second episode?
Second
Okay.
episode, because there's a
I
lot.
agree.
We didn't touch criminal law. We didn't
Yes.
touch corporate. What was the last question I was going to ask you? I forgot it.
You forgot it.
I forgot it, but I think we've touched quite a few, and I've got a feel
Yes.
of really what's happening out there. I want you to talk. So, do you enjoy law?
I do. I enjoy law, and I enjoy the training or the educational aspect of law. Like I said, the litigation part, I am warming myself up to it. I enjoy it, but not as much as the educational aspect, the alternative dispute of trying to settle out of court. But I do enjoy law.
Yeah.
What I may not enjoy, and I mean no offense to our judicial system, I don't think I enjoy our judicial processes. I don't think I enjoy the delays. I don't think I sometimes enjoy sitting and hearing what I hear in court or the manner in which things are spoken. But I do love the law.
The reason I was asking you that is for you to speak to someone who wants to study law. But before you speak to that, what do you call, that advice to a young person who wants to study law, I wanted you to, you never mentioned anything about infidelity. Is it a big thing in divorce?
I don't believe it is.
You don't believe it is?
No. I have come to learn people will overlook infidelity. Yes, when they come, they'll bring it up. But people will overlook infidelity if the finances are okay, if there's no abuse. They'll overlook it.
Yeah.
They will say other things on social media, but infidelity has the least of Botswana's worries, hey?
Really?
No,
The big thing is finances.
The biggest thing is finances.
I nearly said, and almost said, which makes sense because it's a contract. It's about finances.
And remember, we all want to feel secure.
Yeah.
But I also must say, you know, I remember I brought this up last year to a former colleague of mine, and I was like, you know, for the longest time, we would see the majority of people bringing forth divorce proceedings or instituting divorce proceedings being the women. But there is a rise in men who have just decided they no longer want to succumb themselves to marriages that no longer work. And it is good. I applaud them for doing so, especially in a culture where we tend not to give them a voice, you know, where men tend to feel overlooked.
That is so widespread.
Yes.
I must tell you, yeah.
So I was really impressed, you know, especially, and most of the complaints would be, oh, you know, the emotional or verbal abuse. That is usually men's concern. But women predominantly be finances. I think even from both angles, the cheating is very rarely a huge issue that they can work on and move past. But
money is the problem. Kate, please speak to a young boy, a young man who wants to. I personally wish I had the time to actually go for a law degree.
Is it?
But I don't have the enough passion to.
Is it? To
go for it. But just briefly speak to someone who wants to study law, wants to get into the field. Don't scare them. Make sure that they like it.
I'm going to do my best because I always scare people. Yeah. Find your passion. If there's one thing I wish someone had said to me in my first year or the first few years of me doing my law degree was find your niche. Stick to your niche and grow it. Don't settle even when you want to do your attachment, your internships. Don't settle for an institution or a law firm just for the sake of doing your attachment. Find one that speaks to you as an individual, as a professional, and one that speaks to your long-term goals. You don't want to find yourself wasting your years in a place you don't belong. But even when you're, you know, studying for your law degree or reading for your law degree, probe, ask questions, do not fear. I was always the quiet kid in my class. Okay. I would only go like after the class, then go to the lecturer and ask because I'm very reserved.
Okay.
But probe and ask questions. Get out of your comfort zone. Write articles, attend seminars, and getting your law degree is just the tip of the iceberg.
Ooh, interesting.
Law is so broad. There is risk management. There is cyber law that's now growing. There's tech law. There's insurance law. You know, I always say to people that are up and coming, your law degree alone, and this is not to scare you, your law degree alone will not be enough in the next coming years. Even for me, it's not enough. Find something else that you're passionate about. When you study, especially if you study your law degree at UB, at the University of Botswana, you always have what is called, you have your core modules, and then you have electives. I've seen this done by criminal justice students, and it's such a beautiful concept. Where with your elective modules, you don't just choose the easiest module to pass. You look at, if you're interested in financing, take a risk management elective and build and build.
Yeah.
And by the time you are done with your law degree, you would probably have 2 more years to finish your second degree. And in 7 years, you would have 2 degrees. So think along those lines. Do short courses. Learn, evolve, ask questions, reach out to us, get on LinkedIn, connect. The world is your oyster.
Wow, that's a mouthful. I even feel like going to apply.
Do it!
For my degree.
No, but you should. I have a friend, when we finished from 5, he went to aviation school. He became a pilot.
Yeah.
COVID hit and he couldn't get a job.
Yeah.
He's, I think, doing year 4 now of law school. And when he told me he's doing, I'm like, you're crazy. Matthew, you cannot do it. That's 5 years. And what he said to me stuck with me. And he said, whether or not I do it, 5 years is going to pass.
Ooh, that's beautiful.
Right?
That's beautiful,
and
yeah.
So go for it.
I know I said it was the last question. Very last one. Kate, how important is it for an ordinary person to understand law? Just an ordinary person. How much should they understand? What would be your advice?
It's very important to understand it. Remember, law is in our everyday lives. It's in the minor details. It's in you walking in a mall and slipping and falling and understanding what your rights are. It's you going to the doctor and knowing that you have the right to refuse treatment. It's you, I'm not a parent, but it's you taking your child to school. And I've seen this growing trend of, schools publishing videos of people's children on social media.
Without consent.
Without consent, what that means. It's in our everyday lives. Know the basics. Start somewhere. Read a little bit of constitutional law. Go and buy the Constitution. It doesn't cost a lot. Or just download it online, right? And as an employee, it's you knowing and understanding your rights. I just couldn't finish reading, but there's a proposed amendment to the labor laws that now even speak to paternal leave.
Hey.
Right?
Yeah.
It's knowing your laws.
Yes,
it's knowing. It's knowing your rights. It's knowing whether or not it's fair for you to be waking up at 3 a.m. to write a report and be in work at 8.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's very important. And I think knowledge is power. If you know your rights, if you know the law, no one can abuse you.
Beautiful. Kate, thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
through.
You're most welcome.
We've learned a lot, and it sounds to me like you agree that you will come back.
I will.
We'll probably have another lawyer so that we can hear
have
different
a
viewpoints.
discussion.
Thank you so much for coming through.
You're most welcome.
Right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. All TTD viewers, thank you so much for listening through. See you on the next one. Bye.